Hello, so I just wanted to come on here before the episode starts. I hope the audio is okay because I don't have my microphone with me right now, but I wanted to let you guys know about the inaccuracy of the terms that I was using to describe cultures. So I was using the terms East and West to describe Eastern cultures and Western cultures, and I have since learned that they are inaccurate and stem from white Christian nations wanting to distinguish themselves and separate themselves from non-white, non-Christian nations. And so they definitely do have racist history behind them. Obviously, I'm not talking about the cardinal directions because cardinal directions are cardinal directions, but using the terms East and West to describe cultures and to describe nations, to describe people, definitely is not the most correct and definitely is insensitive. I think, however, the reason why I've decided to leave my words in is because it's pretty clear, kind of, not just the fact that I wasn't using them in any racist or insensitive way, but also that I don't agree with so-called Western ideology, and I'm more aligned to what you would call, or what I was calling, Eastern ideologies. The actual correct terms, which I do use interchangeably, is individualistic versus collectivist. So that's another reason why I, decided not to edit out my West versus East. It's because I was using West versus East and individualistic versus collectivist interchangeably. The way that my filming routine has been since the start is that I will do research as I am writing the script, but that research tends to be limited to the bullet points that I already have in my head. It isn't until after, when I'm editing the episode and when I'm trying to come up with more stuff to include in the episode, that I come across even more things. And this is what happened this time, is I was so used to hearing East and West be used in the way that I was using the terms, and then after I had already filmed the episode and after I'm pretty much done editing the episode. This was going to go up tomorrow, but I found out about this and I figured I had to hop in here. Not had to, I feel like I would have been fine if I hadn't addressed it. Like, nobody was going to accuse me of racism. However, I did want to also inform you guys, because at the end of the day, this is an informative kind of podcast, and I do want you guys to use this podcast as kind of like a jumping off point to do your own research. And I can't really do that if I'm using outdated terms or incorrect terms or insensitive terms like I was using in this episode. So yeah, I just wanted you guys to have that information. Enough of me. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of this episode. Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Lily's Little Life Corner. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about anti-natalism. As always, make sure to check out the links in the description for all of the references that I used and everything more informative down there. And as always, I'm not a psychologist, I'm just a psychology enthusiast, so please take everything I say with a grain of salt. Most of the research that I've done is from things that I've seen online, so there's that disclaimer. Another very important disclaimer is that I'm not going to be discussing whether anti-natalism is right or wrong. That's not the point of this episode. The point of this episode is to make you guys aware of some of the harmful rhetoric that is being spread around in anti-natalist circles that affect the people that are already here, that have already been born. So that is what the point of this episode is. So I'm not going to be, criticizing you and telling you you're wrong for believing in anti-natalist whatever. I'm also not going to tell you you're wrong for not believing in anti-natalism. This is not about that, okay? So please, in the comments, don't be telling me that I'm, trying to get you guys to have children, or that I'm trying to get you guys to not have children. I'm not doing any of that. I'm discussing the harmful rhetoric that can be spread through conversations like this when you lack the nuance and when you lack the knowledge of what it is you're actually talking about. Okay? I've just made my room darker because it's getting really hot and I don't know where my portable fan is, and I don't really want to look for it because it's already late as it is. It's almost 10 p.m. so I want to get through this as quickly as possible. Okay, so let's start with defining anti-natalism so that we can all be on the same page, okay? So according to the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, anti-natalism is, quote, an extremely provocative view that is either always or usually impermissible to procreate, end quote. This is the philosophical definition, so it is a philosophical argument, but in more recent times, it's been kind of used as like a stance. It's not really so much being used as a philosophical argument, it's more so being used as what someone is and isn't. So you can either be anti-natalist or not be anti-natalist, depending on your own life and your own choices and what you decide. But because it did start in philosophical circles, it is there's a lot of philosophical arguments for and against anti-natalism. This term kind of got a rise and kind of got its start in the early 21st century, so early 2000s. So it's pretty much been around for about 2 decades, and it's really, like, if we're comparing, it's more popular, like significantly more popular in the West than it is in the East. Also, I'm going to be defining West and East because there's going to be some discussions about the West versus the East. So when I say the West, I'm referring to Western countries with Western ideals and ideologies. So that would be, for example, the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, most of North America, excluding Mexico. Mexico, I find it's in North America, in case you did not know. But I find it to be more aligned with Eastern cultures and ways of life. What I mean by East is, I mean more Eastern countries, so think like countries in Asia, in Africa, but also, like I said, South America. I'm adding South America to the East, even though it's in the West. So it's not like geographical when I say West versus East, because the UK is in the East, it's in the Eastern Hemisphere, not the Western Hemisphere, but it still has Western ideologies and ideas. Same with like some, like half of Europe, half of the countries in Europe. Australia would also be included. Okay, Australia is not in Europe. Okay, I know that. You don't have to tell me. But I think Australia also counts as like a Western country, even though it's in the East. But in Europe, I would say Germany, I think, is another country that also has these kind of beliefs that I'm going to be talking about. But yeah, that's what I mean by West versus East. So it's not specifically geographical. So yeah, this anti-natalist philosophical argument started in the early 21st century and originated and really is popular in Western countries. But as time has gone on, it has gone from being just a philosophical argument used in philosophical cultures to now it's kind of a social media trend, and that is what is interesting, and that is where this harmful rhetoric is mostly being spread, and that is why I am talking about it today. So in order to understand some of these trends that are being populated, no, that's not the right word. In order to understand some of the trends that are being talked about on social media, we must first understand the origins of antinatalism. So we're going to get into some discussions of, like, some philosophical discussions, and I'm going to tell you guys about some of the philosophical arguments that are being used for antinatalism. So, most of the arguments that are for antinatalism or against people having babies argue that giving birth and bringing children into this world does more harm than good overall to humans. One philosopher, David Benatar, I'll leave the link in the description, of course, and in the show notes so that you guys can check it out. Hopefully I'm not mispronouncing it, but David Benatar argues in his asymmetry argument that it is wrong for humans to have kids because the pain experienced by having kids from both the act of giving labor and just having kids in the world, having humans on the world, far outweighs the benefits of having humans on Earth. And again, by pain, he does include giving labor, obviously giving labor. Giving birth is really painful, but also what adds to the pain of kids being born, children being born, is the economic and resource strain that is put on the planet and that is put on society and civilization. So it's not just, giving birth, it's also the pain that Earth and and society as a whole experience once that kid is here and once we have to devote resources to the kid. And if you've seen my other episodes, I hope you're starting to see why I'm against anti-natalism. Okay, again, we're gonna get into it. He also argues that once the kid is here on Earth, they will inevitably experience hardships. So whether that be through poverty, whether that be through heartbreaks, breakups, whether that be through bullying, even natural disasters, he says that it is inevitable and you cannot prevent someone from not experiencing pain. Everybody in their life experiences some kind of pain. He argues that no one wins, not the parents, not the children, and not society or the planet. That is why he is against people having kids. Other common arguments that you're now kind of starting to see on social media, if you are on that side of social media, is the idea that babies cannot consent to being born. They cannot tell you, yes, I want to be born, because by the time that they're here and by the time that they can talk, they're already here, right? If you're agnostic or atheist or you otherwise don't really believe in this idea that there is an afterlife or that people have souls, you probably also don't believe that humans can choose to come to the earth, like their souls can choose to come to earth and can choose to be born. However, spiritual and religious people are more likely to use that as an argument as to why they're having kids. More likely to say, well, the soul of my children chose me to be their parent, that's why I'm giving birth, that's why I'm having children, that's why I had children. So that's kind of a religious kind of separation. Non-religious people are more likely to believe that you cannot consent, whereas religious people are more likely to believe that you can consent to being born. Another popular belief that is present on social media is the idea that poverty and lack of resources, as well as climate change and climate disasters, will get worse if we add more humans, and that again, it is inevitable to prevent those kinds of things, and that it's better to fix the earth before adding more kids onto the earth and making poverty and climate disasters even worse. Now let's get into some beliefs against anti-natalism, or beliefs that are, I don't want to say pro having children because that's not true, but beliefs that are, against the idea that people should not have kids, okay? Beliefs against anti-natalism start with the fact that anti-natalists' beliefs are the most popular in the West, where individualistic cultures rule. And I guess that's a better way to define my East versus West. When I say West, if I say West, I mean individualistic cultures, versus East, they tend to have more community-driven cultures. That's not the right term. Let me look up the right term. Collectivist, that's what I mean. So that's essentially like my East versus West divide. Eastern countries typically are more collectivist cultures where everybody is involved in the community, whereas in the West it's more individualistic cultures where everybody takes care of themselves and themselves only. And that's a really huge thing to keep in mind as we continue talking about this. But yeah, that is where beliefs against antinatalism start. They start with the fact that Western cultures are more individualistic, and whereas Eastern cultures are more collectivist. They're more, society, community driven. And in Eastern cultures or collectivist cultures, you don't tend to hear arguments for antinatalism. You actually hear the opposite. They have different beliefs. Why this matters is because antinatalist arguments on social media are very much so rooted in Western or individualistic cultures' ideals, and they tend to ignore the fact that not everybody thinks the same way and not everybody acts the same way, which is a problem, and we're going to get into it. But anyway, here's an example of like an individualistic culture versus a collectivist culture. So for example, here in the United States, if you have a baby, all childcare and responsibilities for that child fall solely on you as the parent. You typically are not able to rely on anyone else unless you pay for somebody else to help you take care of your baby. It's also really, really expensive to give birth in a hospital, and pregnant people tend to only get 6 weeks of maternity and paternity leave, and paternity leave, which is leave for the dad, usually is very, very rare. Typically, it's only the women that get maternity leave. And again, I'm saying men and women, but I'm trying to be inclusive with my language here. But yeah, I don't really know if there's a word for like non-binary paternity or maternity leave, but just know that female presenting people tend to get 6 weeks of leave, and male presenting people tend to not get any leave at all. They're very lucky if they do get any kind of leave, and the 6 weeks of leave that female presenting parents get tend to not be paid. So if you combine both things, well, if you combine all things that I've said, that not only do you not really have outside support outside of you and the other parent, but also you get 6 weeks of unpaid leave if you are the one giving birth, and you get 0 weeks of unpaid leave or any leave at all if you are not the parent that's giving birth, plus the fact that it is expensive to give birth. You tend to get yourself in a situation where the months leading up to you giving birth, plus the 6 weeks that you get after giving birth, you're spent either deciding which parent is going to be the stay-at-home parent, or deciding what daycare to put your child into once the 6 weeks of paid leave or unpaid leave are up. You cannot use that time to build community or to get your parents to agree to do free childcare. Your neighbors probably are also working and probably cannot look after your kids. You're on your own when you have a kid in the United States. Also, because it's very common for kids to leave at 18 or as soon as possible from their parents' home in the United States, a lot of kids who turn 18 and who try to start their own families, they no longer have that parental support anyways, and a lot of the times they've moved far away from their parents, so it's not like they can, get pregnant and then decide, oh, let's move back to my hometown, because that is gonna add to the expenses that are already building, especially with doctor's checkups, and if you don't have quality insurance, those doctor checkups are also going to be very expensive. So overall, it's a very isolating event to be pregnant and give birth in the United States. Whereas in a collectivist culture such as Mexico, and I'm using Mexico because I'm Mexican, right? I live in the United States, I'm Mexican, I have Mexican family, so that's why, but it's not just United States versus Mexico. I want you guys to know it's, Western versus Eastern, individualist versus collectivist. Keep that in mind, okay? So for example, in Mexico, a more collectivist culture, it's not as isolating to get pregnant and give birth. And this is because, and it all starts with the way that you were raised. The way that people are raised in Mexico is the parents have kids, raise the kids then grow up, become adults, but they do not move out of the home until they've married, usually. And then once they get married and they move out of their homes, their parents then come with them. And these responsibilities typically fall on the oldest child. So the oldest child that is the first to move out and the first to get married will take their parents with them, and their parents will live in the same home as them. But sometimes and not sometimes, it's very common in Mexico to find like multi-family home where it's not just the oldest child and the parents living there, it's the oldest child, the siblings, and the parents living all under one roof, or living all within close proximity, because it's a collectivist culture, right? It's a culture where everybody is helping everybody. So when the parents get pregnant and have kids, they are able to rely on either their parents or their siblings or even their neighbors. It's all too common in Mexico for an older woman to see a misbehaving or a crying child and step in and help the parent their kid. I saw this a lot growing up whenever we would go to Mexico, and whenever my little brother was crying, we would see a bunch of either cousins, aunts, uncles, neighbors, strangers. They would come up to him and they would be like, no, like, it's okay, stop crying. And it was very, very normal to have someone step in and help my mom with my baby brother. And it was also very common here in the United States for my Mexican grandma to go up to other Mexican families with misbehaving children and help them kind of calm their children down. This is a very common story that older women use in Mexico, but essentially what older women would tell either my little brother or what my Mexican grandma would tell, Mexican grandma is only Mexican, or what my grandma would tell other Mexican kids, is that the boogeyman would come and get them if they didn't stop misbehaving, right? And then the parents would sit there and be like, yes, the boogeyman is gonna come and get you. Or, sometimes my grandma would be like, oh, your parents are gonna sell you if you don't stop misbehaving, right? And that's what I mean by kind of this collectivist versus individualistic culture, is that in collectivist cultures, everybody steps in to help raise the child, whether you know the child or not. So it's not as isolating for you to be a parent in collectivist cultures, whereas in the United States, if you were to try and step in and help parent a misbehaving child, their actual parents are going to call the police on you. There's actually a lot more reasons why a parent might call the police on you if you approach their kid and tell them, something along the lines of, if you don't stop crying, the boogeyman is going to come and get you, right? One of the reasons being, is that a threat? Like, are you threatening to take away my child? But another reason is this whole kind of true crime trend that is going on, or that has been going on since the 90s at least, quite possibly longer, of like this idea that there's an actual boogeyman coming out to get you. And that's how we see this rise in technology, such as the Ring doorbell cameras, such as CCTV cameras, such as the Lifetime 360 app that parents download on their kids' phone so that parents can track their kids in real time 24/7, things like that. And that is actually a video essay for the future, for when I am able to have time to make that video essay, because I actually think it's a very interesting topic, and it very much so has informed how our society has moved forward ever since this rise in true crime content and the sensationalization of crime and stuff like that, and like this whole idea that another Jeffrey Dahmer is just right around the corner and is gonna take your baby, and this whole idea that that's the case, and so typically, and it's for good reason, but typically whenever an adult approaches a child, people don't really see that as innocent. They see that as nefarious. And based off of, the Epstein file releases, we can see why. and we can see how that might be valid, but it does add another factor into that isolation that parents experience when raising their kids. They experience this isolation because they're not able to have that trust in their community, that their community isn't going to hurt their children. And so as a result, their children don't go to sleepovers, their children don't go to summer camps, their children don't go to sometimes even school. Some parents prefer to homeschool their kids to keep their kids safe, and so that breeds even more isolation and an even more isolated society, because you have this generation of kids who did not interact with anybody in their sort of developmental ages, and the only people that they interacted with were either kids their age at school, or if they were homeschooled, then siblings, or if they didn't have siblings, then just their parents, right? So it's this whole kind of cycle of things that just have been culminating over the years. And so I think that's very interesting, and I'm going to touch on this a little bit more in next week's episode. Hopefully it goes up next week. I'm having a little bit of trouble getting that going, but next episode is going to touch on that and sort of that parenting aspect of these most recent generations and that isolation that parents nowadays are kind of instilling into their kids, and how that ties into maladaptive daydreaming. Guys, I really ate with this series of releases, but yeah, anyway, that's something that I thought was interesting and something worth noting as well. Because it's all about, no, if my child is misbehaving, it's up to me and me only to correct my misbehaving child. Whereas in collectivist cultures, the misbehaving child is affecting the lives of everyone that they're misbehaving around. And so anyone that they're misbehaving around can step in and correct the child, parent the child, and help society, right? Whoever is in the vicinity of that misbehaving child, whoever is being affected by the misbehaving child. Also, in the United States, and I don't think this is just an issue in the United States, I think this is an issue in various individualistic cultures and individualistic countries, where the public tends to get really, really angry whenever they see a child out in public. So I'm pretty sure my audience is majority from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada. So I want you guys to do a thought exercise with me. If you guys see a child out in public, what is your first immediate thought? What is the first thing that pops into your head? Okay, cool. Maybe some of you guys answered, ugh, not the child, I don't want to see a child in public. Maybe some of you guys answered, oh, I would get really happy, it's a cute baby. So extend that thought to, what if you see that child starting to cry in public? Say you're at the grocery store and you hear a child just crying their heads off. What is the first thought that pops into your head? Most of you, I'm sure, because this is a thing, answered or felt some kind of negative emotion upon just imagining a child in public crying. In collectivist cultures, like I said, because it's so common for people in collectivist cultures to step in and help the parent the child, it's not as common for somebody to feel annoyed at a crying child in public, and it's more common for somebody to step in and help the parent calm the child down. Whereas in the United States, parents are kind of expected to remove themselves and their crying child from the public space and go into a private space until the child calms down. And if you don't, you're given weird looks. You're not helped. You don't get asked if everything is okay. You are given dirty looks, and then everybody moves on about their day, probably cursing you out in their heads, right? Which just isolates parents even more, because if they are living with this idea that they cannot go out in public because they don't want their kids to cry in public, because they don't want to bother the public, then the kids and the parents are kind of forced to stay at home, right? And then if the kids are raised at home, they don't have any training, they don't have any coping mechanisms on navigating being in public, which only raises isolated adults. And we already talked about isolated people in my previous episode. If you skipped that episode, don't go back. You skipped it for a reason, okay? In individualistic cultures, like I said, parents are expected to pay for childcare, whereas in collectivist cultures, because parents tend to move in with their children, it's kind of like a cycle of life kind of situation where the parents raise you and then you help your parents, right? Your parents helped you, now you have to return the favor and help your parents. And then when your kids, are born, you help your kids, and then when they get older, they help you, that kind of thing. It's kind of that cycle of community. It's very community driven. Because parents in collectivist societies and collectivist cultures have that help from their family, they don't have to pay an arm and a leg for childcare. They also most probably do not have to pay an arm and a leg to give birth and to have and raise the baby. Maybe in some countries for sure, but I think the United States is very unique when it comes to that, when it comes to paying like $50,000 to give birth and then paying $50,000 more to enroll your kid into a decent, high quality, and not even high quality, just like decent, normal daycare where they're gonna be safe. Whereas other countries, they kind of don't struggle with that as much, or at least we don't really hear about it. And this could be my American brain speaking. where I only think of the United States and no other countries, but I really haven't heard of other countries. I've heard more of other countries being like, how is your child care and like giving birth and all of that so expensive for you guys? Like, we don't get it. That's not the case here in our country, right? I feel like that's what I hear the most. I don't really hear of other people in other countries agreeing and being like, oh my god, we struggle with that too. But let me know if I am wrong, because I very well could be wrong. But yeah, those are like, that's the basis of or that's one of the critiques for anti-natalism that I've seen, is that anti-natalism really focuses on what Western countries have to deal with, and they don't really look at what Eastern countries or collectivist cultures have to deal with. So it's very like Western centered, it's very like individualistic centered, like, oh, individualistic culture, the culture that I'm living in, we struggle with being isolated, and that's why I think children should not be brought into this world. But when you say children should not be brought into this world, you're saying the world. You're saying everybody in the world should stop having kids, where it's like not everybody in the world treats kids and parents the same as how they're treated in individualistic cultures. They're actually treated much, much better in collectivist cultures. Another critique of anti-natalism that I've seen is basically what I also am against, which is the fact that it brings harm to those that are already here. The focus of the conversation tends to be on the fact that we lack resources and that that's why kids shouldn't be brought into this world, rather than the fact that we lack resources, right? Whenever people bring up the lack of resources or the lack of good partners to mate with, the answer is always, and that's why kids shouldn't be brought into this world. That's why people shouldn't have kids. Rather than, how can we fix these issues so that everybody that's already here also thrives? The blame also tends to be put on women, not men. So, for example, when people do talk about anti-natalism and people who are bringing kids into this world, they're never talking about how men should get a vasectomy. They always talk about how women should not find a partner to have a kid with. The blame always falls on the woman. And actually in some voiceovers, I know my voiceovers are controversial, you don't have to tell me, I fixed the issues, okay? In some of the TikToks that I'm going to show you in the voiceovers, majority of the people are only talking about the women side of things, the giving birth side of things, the being pregnant side of things. It's always girl, you should not have a kid with that broke ass guy. Not broke ass guy, you should not be having sex with women and getting them pregnant. Another issue that I have with anti-natalism is that it assumes that you can control whether you go broke or not. So, one really big argument for anti-natalism is that if you are living in poverty, you should not have kids. But there are a couple of issues with this, and I know this is controversial to say, okay? So I'm gonna talk you through it a little bit. So calm down. Don't comment until I'm done explaining. So, a lot of people will say that it is not in your or your child's best interest to bring a child into a world where you are broke. If you are on food stamps, if you are struggling to pay rent, if you are one paycheck away from being homeless, you should not be having kids. And while I agree that you should fight for your kid to have the best life that you can possibly give them, I also am aware that it is not a controllable factor whether you go broke or not. Majority of people in the United States are 1 or 2 paychecks away from being homeless. They're 1 or 2 late bills away from going homeless. And a lot of anti-natalists will answer, well, all of those people should refrain from having kids. But the thing is, even if you are super privileged and even if you are super prepared to have kids and you have savings, it really only takes like one natural disaster to bring your house down and to get rid of all of your life savings. It is very unpredictable whether you are able to continue to sustain the life that you currently have, right? So that's an issue that I have with that. And of course, anti-natalists will use that argument and say, well, that is why no one should have kids, because it is unpredictable. You cannot predict when something like that is going to happen, etc., etc. But the issue that I have with that particular line of thought is, well, no one should have kids because you never know when you're going to go broke, is that broke people deserve to live. And in fact, there are many broke people that are alive now. Homeless people deserve to live. There are many homeless people right now. What are you doing to help broken homeless people right now? Like, yeah, you can say all you want that it's unethical to bring a child into this world when you are lacking resources, but if you're not going to do anything to help the people that are currently lacking resources, you kind of should not be talking at all, because what that implies then is that you do not believe that people that lack resources deserve to live. And you might sit here and say, no, I absolutely do not believe that. But that is the path that rhetoric can lead down if you do not consider everybody's way of life, everybody's situation, and if you are not actively trying to help those in those awful situations, and you're still advocating against those specific populations from procreating, it is problematic. It does become problematic, and it does become a little bit of like a eugenics conversation where you're saying that broke people should not procreate. And this is where it's controversial, because a lot of people will reply to that and say, how is that wrong to say? Like, why would that be wrong to say? Why would you say that that's problematic? Why would you tell me that I'm wrong for saying that? Like, it's not eugenics if I want kids to live a good life. And you can say all you want, for sure, that you want kids to live a good life. I also want kids to live a good life. I agree with you. Where I don't agree with you is the fact that broke people should not have kids. That's where it's eugenics. Because you're not saying that about rich people. You're anti-natalist, but only when it comes to broke people. And I use you as a general term. I know not everyone believes that. You don't have to tell me. But that's where that line of thinking can go down. It can go down that path of, well, only rich and successful people deserve to have kids, broke and homeless people do not deserve kids. When if we really look at it, most rich and successful people are white. So also, most of like these eugenics conversations that got started got its root in white supremacy, and got its root in the belief that only white people could be successful and only white people should procreate. It's also worth noting that although a lot of homeless people, actually the majority of homeless people are white people, the general public still has this idea that marginalized communities, such as people of color, are the ones who are in the majority when it comes to homelessness, right? And so when you talk about this idea that poor people do not deserve to have kids, it often does stem from a racist eugenics viewpoint instead of looking out for the well-being and welfare of children. Because if it stemmed from you actually being worried about the kids and their safety, you would look into programs that help homeless people get off the street. You would advocate for affordable housing. You would advocate for universal basic income or for universal child care and daycare, and you would advocate for those things. But the majority of the people that are talking about how poor people shouldn't have kids because it's unfair to the kids, they are not then going out into the community and advocating for universal child care, universal basic income, etc., etc. So it's, again, to my point is, what are you then doing? Like, what is this conversation for if you are not then taking those beliefs and putting them into actions that help the people that are already here? You're just, sitting on your high horse, standing on your soapbox, pointing at people and, looking down on them for going against your beliefs, but you're not then actually helping the people that are already here, aka the children of homeless people that have already been born. That's what I'm kind of trying to get you guys to see, is that anti-natalist conversations, as they stand right now, can very quickly start leading down a conservative right-wing pipeline if you are not careful with what it is that you're saying. I also have found that a lot of anti-natalist conversations are focused on women that are single and women who do not have quality partners. This conversation on the surface seems like something that I would agree with, right? I've made several videos at this point. I think I've made like 6 videos talking about bad husbands, bad boyfriends, specifically husbands and boyfriends because it's typically men, right? But I've made several videos about these horrible partners that are horrible to their wives and their girlfriends. And so I think on the surface, if I were to tell you, you should not have kids if you have a horrible partner, you'd be like, yeah, that sounds like something that Lily would agree with. That sounds like something Lily would say. But I actually disagree with that sentiment as well, because like I've said in those several videos, like I've reiterated in those several videos, you can't really tell when you're gonna have a horrible partner or not. You can do as much of the due diligence, you can date your partner as much as possible, and they will still end up a horrible partner. And that is because of how men are conditioned and raised in this society. They're raised to lack that accountability. They're also raised to not really value the contributions of their wives and the mothers of their children. And so that also breeds another kind of layer to this, is that you might be dating a really good guy and he might be a really great romantic partner, but because men are conditioned to kind of not take mothers' roles so seriously, especially in individualistic cultures, when a child comes along, that amazing romantic partner might not be an amazing present dad, because he's not taking his role as a father as seriously as he should be. And so honestly, like, you can't really tell people that they shouldn't be having kids if their partner sucks, because you can't really predict that kind of stuff. You can't really predict that they're going to be a bad parent if your only experience with them has been as a romantic partner. Even owning a pet, a lot of people bring up, like, well, you should then own a pet together and, train the pet. A child isn't a pet, and a pet isn't a child, so even that is not going to translate accurately into their parenting skills. But also, I do want to mention, and it goes without saying, but I still want to mention it anyway, a child is not going to fix your relationship, because like I say, you can't really blame women for having kids with horrible men, because sometimes the horrible men trick and manipulate and gaslight. But at the same time, I do have to talk about the women that exist out there that do believe that having a child makes everything better. And I just want to let you know, guys, that is not the case at all. Having a child with that horrible dude is not going to make anything better. It's not going to soften his heart. Chances are, if he is not gentle with you, he's not going to be gentle with his children. It's just the fact of the matter, okay? Please don't be having kids with any guy that you want to fix because you think a kid is going to fix them, okay? I've said that in several videos. You can't really tell that your partner is going to be a horrible partner until they start being a horrible partner. And yeah, there are several red flags that a lot of horrible partners show, but also a lot of horrible partners wait to show their red flags. They try and be the best possible person that they can be until you are stuck with them, until you have kids with them, until you get married to them, until you sign a lease with them, until you buy a house with them and both of your names are on the deed. They make it that way and they act that way so that you have a harder time leaving them. And those are the women that line of thinking ignores, is that a lot of single mothers did not realize that they would be single mothers. They went into motherhood thinking that their partner was going to be right alongside them for the rest of their life, for the rest of that child's life, for the rest of that partner's life. And then it turned out that their partner was cheating on them, or that their partner was abusive, or that their partner actually did not want to be a parent and just lied to their face. And to add on to that, a lot of the women that are single and are single mothers and raising their kids on their own had to escape from domestic violence, which I find is what that line of thinking ignores. That line of thinking ignores all of the women who became single because they were in a domestic violence situation. It ignores all of the women and children in shelters. It ignores all of the women and children who are trying to make ends meet after their partner, their dad, was abusive. And even sometimes on a less morbid level, sometimes your romantic partner and the parent of your children just dies. And so then you find yourself having to be a single parent anyway. And in this economy, it can be really difficult, especially after the death of a partner, to make ends meet. Being a single parent is not really something that you can have control over. Sometimes you can, but more often than not, people don't plan to have children without help, without a romantic partner that's going to help them. And again, if you're an anti-natalist and if you're a true anti-natalist to heart, you would say, well, that's why people shouldn't have kids. But again, like I said, if you use that rhetoric, if you use that argument, you are ignoring the people that are already here. Okay, so you believe people should not have kids. What are you gonna do to help the kids that are already here? And I say that specifically because a lot of anti-natalist arguments and a lot of anti-natalist proponents are people who believe in so-called harm reduction, where they believe in reducing harm to everybody that's already here. And I'm fully with that sentiment. I do think that we should make everybody's lives as easy as possible, but that is when you start getting involved in your community. That is when you start advocating for allocating funds to those single parents who are in domestic violence shelters. That is when you start advocating for the kids that are already here. That is when you start advocating for taxes being invested into public education and public schools. That's not when you start hating everybody for having kids. And again, the majority of my audience probably doesn't hate kids. They probably are looking out for their local neighborhood kids. However, the majority of people on social media are not that way, and that is who I'm making this episode for. So if you find yourself part of my audience and you're thinking, well, that's not me at all. I'm an anti-natalist, but I'm also helping out in my local community. I also, help out the local children in my community. Then obviously this episode is not about you, because I know you're not like that. Let's talk about the feminist perspective of anti-natalism. So again, this side of the anti-natalist conversation got started mostly in the West, where women who raise kids are not getting the recognition that they deserve for raising kids. However, you must again understand that in collectivist cultures, this is not the case. In collectivist cultures, mothers get the recognition that they deserve for raising kids and are highly, highly respected. For the most part, okay? There's, exceptions in every country, there's exceptions in every culture, but for the most part, collectivist cultures tend to really, really respect mothers and those who are advancing society, those who are continuing to have kids. This is not the case in individualistic societies where, again, like I said, women who raise kids are expected to do all the work as sort of a punishment. The rhetoric that you often hear in the West or in individualistic societies is, well, you had that kid, so the kid's not my problem. But there is a flaw in this line of thinking, and the flaw is that the kid is your problem because the kid is part of your society. And that is what collectivist cultures address. Collectivist cultures respect everybody's role in society at every stage in their life. That is why people will step in and calm a misbehaving child or a crying child in public, even if they do not know that child, because they respect the role that the child plays in society, in their society, and they respect the role that the child plays in advancing their society and advancing their culture. Whereas again, in individualistic societies, if you see a crying child, it is not normal for you to go up to that crying child and try and help them calm down. It is more normal to look at the parent with a dirty look and keep on moving, keep on stepping, because the idea is, not my child, not my problem. To put what I'm saying into a little bit more context, recently my grandma passed away. That's why season 3 is as late as it is and why I haven't gotten anything else that I promised to get done. But when I was at her funeral, I noticed that she had a lot of people come who she babysat, or the parents of the people she babysat. And that's because when I was young, she would babysit not just myself and my cousins, but when she would meet people at the store, when she would approach people who had kids who needed help, right? Kids who were crying, kids who were misbehaving, she would approach the parents, help them out with their kids, and then offer to babysit them. She would do the same to the neighbors, and so out of her own apartment, she kind of ran like a little daycare center where she would babysit kids, and the parents could pay her whatever they could afford, and the kids were raised by her, or looked after by my grandma, as well as bathed. They helped them with their homework, they fed them, their clothes were washed, and it was such a way of her community building. And also at her funeral, actually this was after her funeral, my godfather told me that my grandma, back in her hometown, she would organize a bunch of events and she would bring famous people to their town, and she was the community builder of all time. Literally, my godfather was like, they should really build a statue in her honor. Like, she was so proactive in the community. And so that's basically kind of what I mean when I say that when women are taken seriously in their roles in society, when everybody is taken seriously, when everybody's roles are taken seriously, women and children become so important to society. And again, this is not me saying everybody should start having kids right now, because the way that it is right now in this United States society makes it so that women and children are not valued at all. My point overall, and what I'm kind of trying to get at, and I hope I am able to coherently string together my thoughts. I'll see in the edit if it comes out okay. It probably won't, but essentially what I'm trying to say is that when you are talking about these anti-natalist points, you neglect those societies in which women and children's roles in society are taken seriously, and in which societies where women and children's roles are taken seriously, those societies are thriving because they take everybody's roles seriously. Everybody has a role in society, no matter the age, no matter the gender, and when those roles are taken seriously and protected, everybody thrives. The people in my grandma's hometown thrived because she was the one to organize all of these events, and it wasn't just her. She had help, of course, but she was able to do that because her role as a matriarch was taken seriously. And so that's what I'm kind of trying to argue is, instead of arguing against people having children, you should argue for people's roles in society being taken seriously, and for society to become strong enough where people feel safe to have children. That is what we're missing, is a society wherein people feel safe to have children. Like I said, right now, people do not feel safe to have children. That is why it's so trendy to have people posting think pieces on TikTok telling you that it is selfish to have kids, telling you that it is the worst time possible to have kids. It's because society is not supportive. We're not in a society that supports having kids. We're not in a society that supports the role that mothers play, that parents play, that kids play. We're in a society where everybody looks sideways at a kid, you know? Whenever there is a kid in public, whether that kid is misbehaving or whether that kid is the most well-behaved kid you've ever seen, people are going to get annoyed at that child. Even just the thought of there being a child on an airplane makes people's blood pressure spike to the max, right? To the point where they might have a heart attack. And that's where I'm kind of trying to lead you guys, is instead of arguing against people having kids, you should argue for a more supportive society where we are not facing a water crisis because of AI usage, right? A society where AI data centers are illegal to build, a society in which we are taking care of climate change, a society in which we are taking care of our citizens, a society in which war is non-existent, a society in which genocide is non-existent, where poor people are not struggling to live, where nobody is struggling to live because nobody deserves to struggle to try to survive, right? That is what my point is, and I hope you guys take that away, and I hope you guys are not thinking like, oh, she wants us to have kids. No, I don't want you to have kids. I want you to help me create a better society so that people can feel safe to make the choice of whether they want kids or not. Because I've also seen a lot of people say, like, I really, really want kids, but the way that our world is right now, I don't feel comfortable bringing a child into this world. Super fair. I want that person to feel safe to have a kid, right? I don't want that person to feel like they can't do something because their worries of the future are overpowering what they want to do. Also, I want a society in which people who don't want to have kids are not just sitting on their couches filming TikTok saying it's selfish for you to have a kid, but a society in which those people, maybe they don't want kids themselves, but they would also participate in the society. They would also participate in helping raise kids. If there is a kid crying in the store, if there's a kid, misbehaving on an airplane, they have the freedom to step in and course correct and help build a super strong society that, by the way, already exists, right? There already are collectivist cultures out there that are doing this right now. That's how my grandma had so many people my age at her funeral, because she was the one to step in. She was the one to help mothers when they needed help, and those mothers in turn thanked her, not just by, making their kids her godchildren, but also by helping her when she needed help, paying her with cash, and even to the extent showing up at her funeral, right? She was such a pillar of that society that they showed up at her funeral, even though they were not blood related. They still were very thankful that she stepped in to help when they needed that help. So, I just wanted to kind of summarize my thoughts and make you guys once again understand that I'm not shaming you for having anti-natalist thoughts. It makes sense. The way that the world is right now, it makes sense that people would start to think maybe it's not such a good idea to be having kids right now. Understandable, right? I'm not telling you that you're X, Y, and Z for having those thoughts. What I am telling you, though, is to not just stop there. Don't stop your line of thinking there. Continue that. Okay, it's a horrible time to have kids right now. What can I do? How can I participate in my society to make that better? And the things that you could do is you could go to your city council and argue against building a data center near you. You could check to see if there is an AI data center built near you, and then you could try and gather signatures and petitions to show your city council that you and your fellow citizens of that area in which you live don't want an AI data center built near you, right? So that's someplace you could start. If you want people to have access to water, not just children of the future, but people right now, people my age, people a little bit younger than me, people a little bit older than me. If you want everybody to have water in the future, you could gather signatures, get people to sign a petition against building AI data centers where you live, and tearing down the AI data centers that already exist near where you live. That's a starting point. And that is my point, is kind of what I'm trying to get you guys to understand. But yeah, I'm gonna wrap this up now and move on to the rest of the podcast. I don't know where I'll insert this, but I hope you guys understand my point, okay? And before I get into it too much, I do want to say that I do agree with this Western feminist idea that mothers deserve the respect that they deserve for raising kids and helping advance society and helping bring people into this world, right? I do 100% believe in that idea, and I do think it is something worth fighting for, and it is something worth talking about. Mothers deserve so much recognition, and parents as a whole deserve so much recognition for raising kids. We also do have to talk about the very distinct presence of this kind of Western or individualistic mindset, which is that people who are talking about this on social media think that their issues are applicable to everyone else around the world. And as such, their conversations are very much so lacking context, number one, and number two, very tone deaf when it comes to other cultures that function differently than Western or individualistic cultures. I think the term for this is white feminism, and essentially, if you don't know what white feminism is, it's what I've been saying is that feminists typically focus on the issues that white women struggle with. In this case, I would be using white feminism as Western feminism or individualistic feminism, where these feminists focus solely on the issues that women in individualistic or Western cultures face, ignoring all of the issues that women in collectivist cultures or Eastern countries face. We see this kind of behavior a lot when it comes to women in Islam, and whether white women, or in this case, Western or individualistic women, believe that Muslim women should wear a headscarf. They often talk over the Muslim women, and the Muslim women often say, no, I want to wear the headscarf, I want to wear the hijab, it is my choice to wear the hijab. I'm facing other problems within my countries that are completely unrelated to whether I can wear a headscarf or not. I have the freedom to decide to not wear the headscarf in my country, but in my country, I'm actually facing an entirely different set of problems. And often you will see white women or Western/individualistic women be like, no, no, no. The issue is that you do not have the freedom to decide whether to wear your headscarf or not. We need you to have the freedom to wear your headscarf. And that's out of, this idea that a headscarf or a hijab is inherently conservative/inherently a sign of lack of freedom and lack of women's rights, which is also Islamophobic, by the way. But that's kind of what I'm talking about, is often these Western/individualistic women will talk over the women in Eastern or collectivist cultures and completely make up a reality that is just not true when it comes to women's rights in other countries. There's a lot of other issues that Muslim women face, such as oppression in Western countries. But anyway, so that is kind of what I mean, is that a lot of these conversations are valid conversations in the West, for sure, 100%. They should not be brought into the East, where women face an entirely different set of problems. The issues that Western women face are not issues that Eastern women face, and the issues that Eastern women face are not issues that Western women face. But Western women think that every woman around the world faces the same issues. Okay, so now that I've said exactly why I'm against anti-natalist conversations, let's talk about conversations that I think are actually valuable. So, one part of anti-natalist beliefs is this idea that everybody's going to run out of resources if people keep having kids, that the earth is overpopulated, that we cannot afford to have any more kids, and by afford I don't mean money and financially wise, I mean resource wise, like resource focused. And this is a very, very harmful rhetoric, because in fact we have food to feed like 1 billion more people. I have to look up the exact statistics, but the food that we plant and produce is more than enough to feed everyone enough food. And we can actually fit a couple more people on Earth. The issue is not that the Earth is overpopulated. In fact, we will not be overpopulated for like a very long time, okay? In Western cultures or individualist cultures, typically, capitalism is the financial ideology or economic ideology that kind of rules over that culture. Whereas in collectivist cultures where everybody's taking care of everybody, you see more socialist ideologies applied. There's not as many socialist countries, but definitely more countries with more like socialist policies. So for example, free healthcare, free higher education, billionaires are taxed, the people own the means of production, those kinds of policies where it's not exactly a capital, or it's not exactly a communist country, but they have socialist policies that help everyone, because the whole idea of collectivist culture is everybody helps everybody. Whereas in individualistic societies, where it's you pull yourself up by the bootstraps and you don't ask for help, more capitalist ideologies and policies are put into place, such as minimum wage, the trickle-down economics, everybody has to pay for their own health insurance, everybody has to pay for their own, hospital visit. You should not rely on taxes. If you rely on food stamps, it means you're lazy. And that's what I think majority of anti-natalists are missing when they particularly say that we're going to run out of resources and that we're going to become overpopulated if people keep having children. It's just simply not true. It's not true. You know what is true though is people are hoarding resources. That's what is true. So again, my solution here, my plea to you guys is to start fighting for everybody that's already here instead of worrying about people who are not here, who are people who are not even, planning on being here. Because you don't know whether people are going to have kids or not. Okay, let me rephrase that. You don't know. You're arguing against people who may or may not be here, if that makes sense. And what's going to come out of arguments like this is it talks about forced sterilization instead of talks of how you can help the people that are already here. The people that are already here are the ones that are struggling. The people who are already here are the ones that need the most help. And of course, pregnant people also need help, and of course, their babies, when they are born, are gonna need help as well. But if you focus on helping the people that are already here, then you're also helping the people that are inevitably gonna be born into this world, because you cannot prevent people from having kids, no matter how much you talk about how wrong it is to have kids. The only effective way to prevent people from having kids and getting pregnant is forced sterilization, but that obviously is not anything to do with harm reduction. And in fact, forced sterilization was often practiced on people of color and people who white scientists decided were not worthy of procreation. These scientists would take marginalized women and they would forcibly operate on them, often without the women's consent. And then when the women wanted to get pregnant and have kids, they found out they couldn't because they had been operated on without their consent. This is what I mean when I say that talks of anti-natalism can lead down a very slippery slope of conservative, right-wing, white supremacist talking points if you're not careful about what it is that you're actually advocating for. And I guess that's always been my issue with anti-natalist conversations, is that you cannot stop someone from having kids. And so what ends up happening is we just start having conversations going in circles. Oh, but it's wrong to have kids. But you can't stop people from having kids. But it's wrong to have kids. But you can't stop people from having kids. Instead of putting that energy into helping the people that are already here and the people that have already been born and the people that are currently struggling. Because again, you can say all you want that women who have babies with deadbeat dads are the issue, but at the end of the day, you're only hurting the women that have already had the kids. You're only hurting the kids that have already been born. The deadbeat dads are not being hurt. You're putting all the blame on the women that the deadbeat dads manipulated. And then what? The kid still suffers because their public schools funding got cut to invest in AI data centers. You get what I'm saying? That's my issue with anti-natalism. And look, stop, look, and listen. Okay, I understand the sentiment 100%. In fact, it is a natural thing to happen for species all over the world to stop procreating when they stop having access to food, water, shelter. That's a very normal process, and it's very, very normal for people on their own to decide to not have kids. And honestly, once you start talking about anti-natalism for all, where you are trying to convince everybody to become anti-natalist, you start to go down even darker and more extreme paths. Trying to convince everybody to be anti-natalist is already an extreme reaction. An even more extreme reaction that stems from anti-natalism for all is ephilism, which is the philosophical idea that all life should be extinct, that all life should cease to exist. And we can see the culmination of this philosophical idea in the recent bombing of a fertility clinic, where 2 men bombed a fertility clinic because they no longer wanted people to come to Earth. They no longer wanted babies to be born. They were so against the idea of life being life that they took such an extreme action and became terrorists. And this is ultimately the warning and why I'm even making this episode in the first place. You can absolutely go down extreme paths through innocent ideas. You can first start with, I don't want kids to suffer, and end up bombing a fertility clinic. These are things that are so easy to go down, especially if you are not careful with the things that you are consuming, and especially if the people that you come across are not careful with the way that they're wording things and not careful with how they're going about talking about their concerns. So definitely do be careful when you are talking about anti-natalism, and have care and have empathy for the people that may or may not disagree with you. I hope I did not talk too much in circles. And once again, please make sure to check out the links in the description and in the show notes to learn more about anti-natalism and to learn more about homelessness and to learn more about food insecurity around the world. I think those will be very valuable to you and they will inform you on how to proceed. Final thoughts. It's inevitable for people to struggle in life, but it is also inevitable for people to have kids. You can't prevent people from having kids. Just like you cannot prevent people from suffering, you also cannot prevent people from having kids. No amount of shame, no amount of arguments, no amount of talking, no amount of harmful rhetoric being spread around is going to prevent people from having kids. They're going to continue having kids. I don't know what to tell you. But as always, let me know what you guys think and let me know if you are an anti-natalist. If you are, I still love you. Thank you for watching. Nothing against you. I just would really want you to consider, I really do want you to consider the people that are already here, and I want you to consider how best you can help the people that are already here. And yeah, thank you for watching. As always, check out the links in the description. You can find my social media and my merch linked down below and in the show notes. And yeah, I will see you guys next week. I'm not sure what I'm going to be talking about next week. I'll see you guys next week. Bye.